Essentially, there is no one in the campaign, there is no one in the political world, the chattering class of this group of 300, 500 who do not read Mark Halperin, do not read the note, although you're not part of that, other things along the way. He does not define what the news, what it is, but he helps define what's important and what's not. That's all I'm going to say. You want to say anything at this point? Because I want you to ask your question, and I want you to ask your question.
I'll just say a couple things. Thanks for having me here. There's a difference between what is and what ought to be, and part of being involved in an academic setting is trying to understand what is, understand the way the press operates, understand the way campaigns operate, understand the connection between campaigning and governing. But sometimes studying what is can make you feel a little bit cynical, because what is sometimes not the way it should be, and there is a disconnect between particularly how people in the press and people in politics and government serve the public interest, because that is what the point is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the point of political journalism. It's supposed to be the point of being in campaigns and government. So a lot of the things that Wayne talked about, all the things Wayne talked about were dead on. But I think a lot of them, if you misunderstand it and think about, well, that we should just accept that as the way it is, rather than thinking, how can it be different? How can journalists, political journalists, and people in politics and campaigns do their jobs differently so they're more regularly serving the public interest? Wayne is a little bit more optimistic and positive about the role of the press than I am. Things are changing very much in our business. There's some things that have always been a problem. The press's emphasis on conflict, the press's emphasis on scandal and on personality. I think it's always been a problem, but I think, and I argue that it's getting worse. There are trends in our business that are making it worse, and people in political campaigns who are smart take advantage of our weaknesses, our increasing weaknesses, to help their candidates get elected, rather than thinking, well, we'd be a better democracy if the press were stronger. How can I help make the press stronger? Very few people in politics think about that. What they think about is how to exploit our weakness. Very few people in the press have the luxury of thinking about what are we doing wrong, what could we do better, because we're under financial pressure and competitive pressure. I think a big part of of contributing to a better country and a better democracy, whether you're doing it as a student or a practitioner, is to think about, how do I get through today? How do I write this campaign plan today, this semester? But to think longer term about how can it be better? I don't accept the declining role of the press, the declining standards of the press. I recognize it as what is, but I don't accept it as what ought to be. Just as I don't accept the cynicism that people have about politics and about the media. And just as I hope people in politics don't accept the more negative aspects of our democracy and our political culture. So when I answer your questions, I'll try to highlight what is and explain what I think is, but I'll also, as much as I can, try to say what I think ought to be. And again, it's easy to sit back and study these things or to just get through the day or the semester or meet your next deadline. But I think it's important for all of you as you go out, and whether you're getting involved in politics as your careers or not, in campaigns and governance, to think about how can we make it better, how can it be different, because the trend lines are mostly bad in terms of the public's respect for my business and for people in government and politics. And the trend lines are mostly bad for how confident people who are practitioners are that they can do the thing that will be successful, win journalism awards or get high ratings or win elections and take office, that you can be successful and contribute to a better country. So with that predicate, I'm happy to answer any questions you want.
Can I start off with a couple of questions before we go into? Let's talk about the lay of the land in terms of the press, the way candidates, what the candidates have to deal with. As somebody who spends their morning on Sunday mornings, looking at a TV set and getting pissed off at all the talk shows. Last Sunday, and after the Petraeus and Crocker testimony in front of the Senate and the House of Representatives, I watched, because now with the miracle of television, you can do two stations at the same time, back and forth. I watched Fox News and I watched ABC's programs at 9:30 when they had their panels, and they seem to be operating in completely different universes. As a matter of fact, I don't even think they're part of the same world in terms of what they were looking at. On Fox News, the entire program was essentially the MoveOn.org ad. Is the MoveOn, General betray us? That's incredibly important. Why will the Democrats not denounce him? ABC was completely about well, they're talking about military success over in Iraq, but where's the political success?
Right.
Okay, you're a candidate. Are we dealing with essentially, how do you deal with that in terms of essentially, is this just reinforcing the view that the press is biased, they have a point of view?
Right.
And how do you deal with that as a candidate?
Right. I could talk about that for an hour and a half, so let me try to do it quickly, but let me start with a survey of you all, a couple questions. If you're uncomfortable voting in front of others, close your eyes when you raise your hand. How many people supported President Bush for president, voted for, or if you weren't old enough, supported President Bush for president in 2000 and 2004, or 2004? Raise your hand. Congratulations, by the standard of Austin, you're a very diverse group. That's great. How many of you think that the media is either, you don't have to specify which when you raise your hand, liberally biased, consistently liberally biased, and against it, Republicans are consistently conservatively biased, pro-Republican? Anybody? All right. Well, in that respect, you're not like a lot of Americans. I think one of the things that Karl Rove and George Bush came to Washington believing was that the press is liberally biased, that the press in its orientation, the so-called mainstream press, which is a phrase Rush Limbaugh and I don't use because we don't think it's necessarily right, that the press is, on many issues, too liberal. On social issues, most reporters support gay rights, support abortion rights, don't own guns, don't necessarily go to church. It's not true of everybody, but that's the dominant ethos. And that they believe that what Presidents back to Richard Nixon believed, which was that was a fundamental imbalance between the two parties in dealing with the press. I tend to believe that argument has a fair amount of merit as it relates to national politics and as it relates to local politics. My guess is that in Austin, as in Washington, most political reporters, I'm not singling out Wayne here, most political reporters have better relationships with their Democratic sources, hang out with them more likely to socialize with them, belong to the same book clubs maybe, and share their worldview more. What George Bush and Karl Rove did, unlike Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, the first George Bush, did was say, we're going to change this. We're going to do our best to build up the few organizations out there that we think are more conservative, and we're going to cater to them. So one of, I thought, the real crystallizations of that attitude was on the day that Petraeus and Crocker testified, they did one interview, which was an hour-long interview on Fox News Channel. At a time when you're trying to unite the country, this is not a good move as far as I'm concerned. Because what's happened in the Bush era is that liberals have come to view, increasingly, the media as conservatively biased. Not just Matt Drudge, Fox News Channel, and Rush Limbaugh, but they now look at ABC News and Time Magazine as conservatively biased. And the blogosphere allows liberals now to express that view all the time. So neither side particularly trusts us. Clearly, though, I would argue, as much as I have sympathy for Karl Rove and George Bush's view that Time Magazine, ABC News, and Dallas Morning News have a liberal bias on many issues in many instances, it's clear that that bias is not as pronounced as what Fox News Channel does. And I think one of the problems, and one of the ways I think the country needs to change is we need news organizations that are trusted by everybody. I think to have a free press, a strong press, a press that cares about the truth and about adjudicating disputes in the political arena and the governmental arena, and in other areas as well, but particularly important in politics and government, is essential for democracy. And the experience you had, and I had much the same view. I thought it was funny when Chris Wallace started out on Fox News Sunday, started out the panel by saying, now I don't want to spend a lot of time on this MoveOn.org ad, but then spend almost the entire panel on it. You see people having nowhere to go where they can feel like they're getting an overall broad objective view. And increasingly our political dialogue is dominated by people who don't want that. They're people who want to watch the Fox News Channel because it reinforces what they already think. They want to go to conservative websites because it reinforces what they already think. They want to listen to Rush Limbaugh. And liberals are increasingly feeling they're not represented by the old media, what some call the mainstream media, and they're looking for their own outlets, Air America, liberal websites. So I think that the war, which is an incredibly divisive issue, obviously, is just the latest example of a topic in public policy which is now covered by two parallel universes, where some of the things that are said on Fox News Channel could appear on ABC News this week, but much of the framing, much of the meta-narrative is a parallel universe. And I think that's bad for the country. And again, the solution is to have strong news organizations that can be independent and can win the trust of people left, right, and center. The problem is there are fewer and fewer strong news organizations strong enough to do that. And the market, as the market has become fragmented, being a Fox News Channel, incredibly successful. Fox News Channel, by every measure, but perhaps editorial fairness, is incredibly successful commercially, makes a fortune. But they draw 2 million viewers for their most highly rated show. 2 million viewers. That's not a lot of viewers by old standards of what constitutes success in the television business or the newspaper business. But having a niche is what people are going towards. And the best way to have a niche is to appeal to a smaller group of people who feel strongly and feel consistent loyalty to your product. That's what Fox is.
Okay, let me follow up with that, and then I'll we're talking about this, especially taking a look at Journeys with George. If you look at that, and you're a cynical person, you look at what the press covers in campaigns, and you go, this is all made up fake events. You know, as somebody dating myself who used to love watching political conventions, I loved conventions. You know, there were battles over the platform. You know, who's going to win? Who's going to be the vice presidential nominee? Now they're so fake and so processed that they don't even get on the news anymore.
Right.
You know, except for PBS.
Right.
Which doesn't have anything else to be able to put on anyway, and good rights for them are 2 million.
Right.
Why does this affect anybody? Is anybody actually looking at the news and being affected by it in terms of the way they vote at this point?
Right. Well, look at the coverage today, only some of which I got to see starting my day early in Central Time, of Hillary Clinton's health care plan. And I'm going to take a little bit issue with what Professor Slater said earlier. Conflict gets covered. Wayne said the conflict that was going to get covered here would help you understand whether the plan was a good idea or not. None of the coverage I saw, very little of the coverage I saw, give you insight into whether her ideas are good or not. What it was, as she did live television interviews, was, aren't you, revisiting the scene of your biggest public policy disaster? Or isn't your plan just Hillary Care 2.0? Or Mitt Romney says this is like European-style health care. It was about the imagery of it, which Hillary Clinton was aware of and did her best, and her campaign did a very skillful job of anticipating those things and dealt with it. The conventions are fake because they know reporters will cover fake things, and that if they do something real, we'll cover it, and it will produce negative coverage. They would rather get neutral or little coverage than the kind of negative coverage that some past conventions, which you loved because they were interesting, produced. I think the solution to that, though, is the public has to demand greater interest. If ABC News thought that if we put on the conventions, gavel to gavel, or even 2 hours a night in prime time, tens of millions of people would watch, we'd love to do it. There's not a person in the news business today, in the television news business today, who wouldn't love to cover the conventions. There's no public interest in it. It's sometimes accused of a cop-out and saying it's up to citizens to produce this, but that's what our market system is like. If people want coverage of the substantive details of Hillary Clinton's plan, if people want gavel-to-gavel coverage of the conventions or more coverage of the conventions, they have to vote with their remote controls or their mouses or whatever it is that will produce eyeballs for organizations. It doesn't even necessarily need to produce revenue. If ABC News knew that 20 million people would watch convention coverage, and we did it with no sponsorship or little sponsorship, I suspect ABC would do it. But the public has to be interested in this.
Well, see, I guess what I'm wondering about is that, I mean, of course, when Hillary Clinton, unveils a health policy plan, I mean, I'm assuming unless the campaign has all of a sudden become dysfunctional, they're realizing that the main story is going to be, oh, didn't you do this once before and it was a disaster? So they're already coming out with some sort of a storyline. There's a reason why they're doing this. Okay, that said, is the function of the press right now for a campaign to essentially figure out how to be able to run out a story which is going to help your campaign, and conversely avoid anything that will lead to a story that doesn't help your campaign, that essentially they're playing the press, again, and this may be obvious in terms of the...
What matters to a single mother with 2 kids in San Antonio, whether this is politically tough for Hillary Clinton or whether she's offering a plan that's a good idea? I think the press should cover and will cover both. But if you looked at it as a percentage, I mean, go, if you TiVo the morning shows, or read the transcripts, go read the newspaper stories, what percentage of the stories are devoted to the political theatrics of it, and what percent is devoted to, is this a good idea? And I include in the political theatrics what Obama thinks about her plan, what Edwards thinks about her plan, what Mitt Romney thinks. That's interesting, and if they're making substantive points. But I'll give you an example. The plan she's proposing is, in almost every particular that she laid out, and she left some holes in what she laid out, what Mitt Romney signed into law in Massachusetts. Now, basically, it's a plan that is driven by a individual mandate. Everyone has to have insurance, like auto insurance. If you don't have it, and you can't afford it, you get a government subsidy. Government help for small businesses, attempts to save money, not only by creating a larger insurance pool, but by lowering the costs of policies through some government regulation, as well as attempts to bring more costs out by having preventive care and things like that. Now, Mitt Romney argues substantively that he doesn't think that's a good idea nationally. He thought it was a good idea in Massachusetts. There's some legitimacy to that position, that a policy that might work, a plan that might work at the state level would not work at the national level. But for him to just say this is Hillary Care 2.0 is no better than Hillary Care 1.0, this is socialized medicine, that's not a substantive critique of her plan from a political rival. That's just political rhetoric. I'd give that some space, but if you look at the amount of attention Mitt Romney got in this news cycle for those lines, with almost no one pointing out that it's his plan virtually exactly in Massachusetts, I think just it doesn't do a service to the democracy. Yes, we're going to cover the fact that a decade ago she tackled this issue, but it shouldn't be 90-10, which is my rough sense of what the coverage was like in most places.
You were asking, yeah, go ahead, yes.
Well, actually, it was a different question than I asked before, but like when you give the example of the convention, where you're saying people have to want to watch it, wouldn't provide an analysis viewers rather than just covering it as like a press conference?
Like 6 and we would have our own analysts on, including me, to talk about what was happening. And the podium was a backdrop. Now, does that serve the public interest? Would people rather hear, do you know that Barack Obama's speech at the 2004 convention was not covered on broadcast network television? Because none of the networks covered that night, and if they did, they didn't cover his speech. I think probably would have been better to have Barack Obama available to talk than me, George Stephanopoulos. But I think in the current technological era, you can have both, right? You could be watching on C-SPAN, you could be watching the podium, or you could be watching a broadcast channel with their commentators, and different people might want different things. I think that's an open question. But I think in a country where we have two dominant national political parties, you can argue if that's a good thing or not, but that's what we have. I think once every 4 years, giving 8 hours of broadcast television time, and through the once every 4 years, 8 hours, I'm not good at math, but that's a very small percentage of the amount of primetime broadcast time, to the two major political parties to let them do a quote-unquote advertisement, I'm fine with that. I don't have a big problem with letting the country hear from the major political parties in an unfiltered way 8 hours every 4 years.
But, I mean, okay, well, I mean, I guess what I was trying to say in that question was that, like you were saying, the analysis of pointing out objective truths or, untruths, but where is the responsibility in that? And
do it
afterward.
Do it on Nightline. Do it on ABCNews.com. Do it in the Dallas Morning News the next day. If you live on the right side of the digital divide, you live in a time where you can get plenty of information about what candidates say all the time. I think occasionally it's good to hear directly from the candidates, and I think it's good to have strong, trusted news organizations to then go back and say, well, what President Bush or nominee Kerry said in their speech wasn't quite right, and here's why. But I think occasionally you can hear directly from the candidates.
But isn't that kind of the back page, front page problem where people are not going to have a lot of time, working all the time,
right.
They'll watch it on TV news. Oh, this regurgitated campaign said.
Absolutely, I think that you can't cop out and say, well, it was available on the website, so that we did it on the website, and that counteracts what was on broadcast television. I agree with that. We have to be smart and aggressive about annotating and correcting the record in a prominent way. But there's room enough for that, and that shouldn't preclude letting the candidates occasionally speak.
And the other thing is, at the same time, while the media are making our decisions and we're trying to present in the best way something that happened, at the same time, each campaign is trying to define and redefine what just happened. In 1990, Ann Richards got up for the Democratic National Convention in New York. And this was before she was governor and made the great speech.
88.
What did I say? 1988. I'm sorry, 1988. Yes, just seemed.
You were there.
I was there. And she basically made the speech, poor George, meaning the president's father. Poor George, he can't help it. He was born with a silver foot in his mouth. Great line. The speech was a pretty darn good speech. It was a coming out speech politically, nationally, for Ann Richards, who 2 years later became the governor of Texas and became this great celebrated figure. I was there that night. It was, yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir anyway, so everybody's cheering. She looked beautiful. She was fabulous. She's witty. She was brilliant. The speech was so well received in the hall. The immediate speech was she was a star out of that convention as one of the speakers. Immediately, the Republicans began to work very effectively, and I give them enormous, great credit, the Bush people, the Bush forces. Did you see how mean she was? Man, that attack was below the belt. George Bush, and you had the equivalent of Fox News before Fox News, basically saying that speech was it was general Petraeus. It was unbelievable how bad she was, attacking the President of the United States in a way that was catty, the woman, catty, unfortunate, wrong, and so forth. The night of that speech was an enormous triumph. The next day, the news coverage was great. Okay? By the time I got back home, my mother, who was living in Conroe, now I think she was living in Port Arthur then. At that point, my mother said, I can't believe that Ann Richards said that. That was catty. That speech was below the belt. She attacked, because the subsequent conversation, as presented in the media, as driven more successfully, I would say, by the Republican side, was to reinterpret the events of that night, where you might have watched Ann give her speech and thought, pretty damn good. But 3 days later, you're thinking, my God, I'm not sure that speech was what I thought it was. And if you ask people now, to the extent that they remember, they do remember, if you're your basic Democrat, she was a goddess. But if you're a Republican who did not inclined to support Ann Richards at that time, you remember that as a really below the belt speech.
Let me say something about the rule of reciprocity, and this goes to the heart of what is and what ought to be, and I think goes to the point of your question. You may be wrong. In the press, it's common to say, as Wayne suggested before, moon is made of rocks, moon is made of green cheese, candidate A says one, candidate B says one, and let the people decide. I've been a big proponent throughout my career of not doing it that way. If candidate A is saying the moon is made of rocks and candidate B says the moon is made of green cheese, we should point out that one person's right and one person's wrong. And part of the reason that people on the left now distrust the press is almost as much, maybe more now, as people on the right is, there have been many instances during the run-up to and the execution of the Iraq War when people on the left have felt that the press has basically taken what the government said and treated it equally, or even with more respect than what critics of the war have said. I think that's an abdication of the press's responsibility. If you're working in a campaign and doing a campaign plan, you can take advantage of that rule, knowing that if you are weak on something and your opponents are attacking you, you can say something that may have less truth to it, but know that it will get 50%, 40%, whatever it is, equal weight within stories. That is not a great thing for democracy necessarily, but those are the rules. And that is something that you can exploit, particularly in a weaker press corps. The stronger the news organization, the more experience it has, the more confidence it has about its place in the world, the more financially successful it is, the greater ability it has to stand up and say, no, what Bush said is wrong, what Kerry said is right, or what Kerry said is wrong, what Bush said is right. You will read many more stories in the New York Times taking a stand in that sense than you will in a smaller paper. You will see many stories in national networks news than you will in local news because of those disparities. But I would argue not enough to serve the interests of democracy.
You would ask, yeah, go ahead. You would ask the same question or a different question.
Actually, I have a different
Okay.
question. It's kind of two related questions, but in terms of the presidential debates, like, are the numbers good on that? And that's sort of, I mean, it seems like a lot of people watch those and just aren't able to get the same numbers for the conventions.
Yeah, there's more public interest in the debates, but it's also the case that the networks feel the debates are more likely to produce a substantive discussion, even though there are plenty of critics of them, because it's both sides, rather than, as some people in network news would now say, advertisements. The numbers are a little bit misleading because they're it's on every channel, so there's nowhere else to go, and there's a certain number of Americans who will watch whatever's on. In a big country, that can get to tens of millions. So the debate numbers can be higher, and debates are, I think almost anybody would say, more interesting because you're hearing both sides and there's more tension to them. The conventions have become so stage managed that there's no drama to them. They are too stage managed because the parties want to drain them of any possible negative news.
And my second question was just relating to news sources that people are moving towards. Do you find that there's greater trust of, I don't know, like say Slate, to emerging news sources that people feel are more trustworthy? Because
Well, I think people, because our political discussions are so dominated by the two polarized sides, that those are the biggest consumers of news. That's why organizations on the web and on cable are tending towards looking for their niche on one side or the other. They trust them more, but not, and again, this is a fundamental problem with our political media democracy now. They trust them more not because they're more accurate, but because they feel they're presenting the side that they believe in. They're presenting news in a slanted way that confirms their biases about what they think of George Bush or what they think of the war in Iraq or what they think of Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or John Edwards. So I think people are gravitating there for reasons different than I would like them to gravitate to. And I think people are now, because they so distrust the old media, they now look at, Slate is not a good example because Slate has pretty, what I'm trying to say, because they have pretty good journalistic values, although they skew left. They look at the Drudge Report or TMZ or Powerline or any website as equal to ABC News, the Dallas Morning News, the New York Times, or Time Magazine. That's a problem because it takes not just resources, which most of those websites don't have, to do serious reporting, but it takes a commitment to being, to borrow the phrase, fair and balanced, truly fair and balanced, and not skewing facts and making things up in order to push an ideological agenda.
it seems like, I don't know, Slate's just an example popping in my head, but that they're also fairly critical of liberal news sources. Like they'll
Slate
cite,
is.
they'll cite New York Times when they're wrong.
Slate is it's run by a friend of mine, so I'm a little bit biased too. But Slate is an exception in the sense that it is intellectually honest for the most part, and even though it tends to skew left, as you said, they're willing to be, part of their intellectual honesty is they're willing to be critical of the left. But they are one of a handful of new media organizations that I think has that commitment to excellence and quality and fairness, and using the medium in a way that takes advantage of the ability to reach people. And they're somewhat successful and an inspiration and an encouragement to people who think that the web and cable and other new ways of distributing information can be something that fosters an intellectually honest debate. But again, they're an exception.
Do it. You do it.
When I went to J school, I was taught that the media is a watchdog and that you let the reader decide, and the media tells you what to think about, not what to think, and things like that.
You went to the journalism school of what ought to be.
Yeah. But today, what you usually see is increasingly that news or media are either political agents of a certain political thought, or do you see that people are villainized like Dan Rather if they go against the message that is out there.
Right.
So my question is, I guess, a twofold. How do you, as a gatekeeper, keep media from being used as, and this is going to sound crass, but a hegemonic tool of the power elite? Mm-hmm. And then also, why do people not see, like the regular masses, not really see that the media, like Snow comes from Fox, is now the mouthpiece of the White House, or things like that. Yeah. Why don't people see that? Why don't they put things together? And then also, why don't media remind us of that?
That's a very conservative, I can tell you're very politically conservative.
Well, the first thing in terms of hegemonic elite, one of the other biases of the media, besides ideological bias and scandal bias and conflict bias, is an elite bias. I don't travel as much as I used to covering politics, but I travel enough to know that reporters in Washington and New York do not understand the anger over the immigration issue that exists in every state in the country, not just in states like Texas, considered immigration state. So the press tends to be establishment and too close to the people who are powerful on Wall Street and in Washington. That is a big problem. The old media and the new media is elite. It tends to be filled by people who went to college, by people who are relatively well off, who don't worry about where their next paycheck's coming from or how they're going to get health insurance or whether illegal immigrants are bankrupting their community. That's a big problem, and it's not a new one, but I think it's gotten a little bit worse in the last couple decades, and it's one that I think is difficult to address. On the question of people like Tony Snow, people in Washington, for the most part, and I live in New York, but in Washington are too close to people like Tony Snow to say, to necessarily watchdog them as much as they should. That revolving door has become more crowded, again, in the last couple of decades, with mostly Democrats going through it. You know, my Republican friends, like Karl Rove, will say, could you imagine if Karen Hughes and Joe Albaugh hosted two of the network Sunday morning shows? And the reason they say that is because George Stephanopoulos worked for Bill Clinton, Tim Russert worked for Mario Cuomo and Daniel Patrick Moynihan. So again, you may say, what an outrage that Tony Snow goes from Fox to the White House, probably now back to Fox. But conservatives say, what an outrage that you've got these Democrats hosting Sunday shows and many more Democrats going through that revolving door. Tony Snow's a very prominent example, but he's something of an exception, badly outnumbered by Democrats. I don't think either's great. I think, again, it's another thing that erodes the public trust in us as people who are fair, people who are worried about the public interest rather than an ideological agenda. But it's a growing trend, and most people who hire in television in particular, a little bit in newspapers, don't seem troubled by it. They like the access and the information that can be provided, and they're people who are excellent and have become excellent journalists, even if they didn't start that way. Going once through the revolving door, as George and Tim have done, I think people generally accept, and you prove yourself over time. George and Tim are two of the fairest journalists I know, and they've proved themselves over time and have the respect of a lot of Republicans. It's going back and forth more than one time through the revolving door that I think, again, really undermines what people think about journalism. And it becomes harder to judge people based on the strength of their work when it seems like they move quite easily back and forth and back and forth. Yes, sir.
Back in the old days, the dark old ages, we used to have two newspapers in every town. And
Yeah.
Institutions like CBS had tremendous resources to get to the story beneath the story.
Yeah.
To what degree are the new economics of media, where that's very fragmented, to what degree is that kind of hampering the ability of reporters to dig below the surface and get stuck with just getting the soundbites?
I couldn't overstate its importance in terms of the kind of news that gets produced, and in terms of, I think, the health of the democracy as the extent that media plays a role. There's simply no news organization in the country, none, where the senior managers, let me phrase it in a more articulate way, at every news organization in the country, the senior managers spend over 50% of their time worried about decisions to stay in business. That's what their focus is on. How can we expand to the internet? How can we keep our old media products alive? And how do we balance the resources? Where will our new advertisers come from? How can we make money on the web or in television if we're a print organization? Or how can we make money on the web or in print if we're a television organization? It's a battle for the senior management. It puts extraordinary stress on people below, middle managers. The daily working journalists are asked to do more, to file more stories with no additional resources. And it makes a mockery of the concept of investigative reporting. When you see so-called investigative stories in this election cycle, like the story about Hillary Clinton's bundler, Norman Sue, I will bet you almost anything that 9 out of 10 times or more, those were not stories dug up by shoe leather wearing investigative reporters, but they were done by the campaigns themselves, who handed the research to a news organization and said, go to it. Now there's always been some of that. But that's not the way investigative stories should 9 out of 10 times come. It should come from the hard work of news organizations, not trying to embarrass people in public life, but trying to hold powerful interests accountable to the public interest. That is one of many functions that is almost never performed now because we simply don't have the resources to do it. And the problem is, besides the fact that young people, unfortunately, don't care nearly as much about being consumers of news as older people, besides the fact that the fragmentation of the market has produced a lot more competition, we've lost our monopolies, but also because these news organizations simply can't see an economic model. If you said to the publisher of the New York Times or the head of Velo Corporation or the head of Time Inc., what is your economic model for your existing assets 10 years from now? They'd have no idea. You say that to a lawyer, a doctor, an investment banker, there's a lot of uncertainty in those businesses, but they could tell you our core products will look something like they look now 10 years from now. It's not a news organization in the country that can say that. When your focus is survival, you're just not going to be able to do as much good journalism. And if you're doing good journalism the right way, that means there's not going to be as much focus on protecting the public interest. It's a real problem. And there's no great solution. Because I'll just say, you could imagine there being a new investment firm with a national reach performing what investment firms do, a new law firm. Try to imagine somebody starting a new New York Times or a new ABC News or a new Time Magazine with a national reach and a commitment to public service and to holding powerful interests accountable to public interest. No one would do it. It would take millions of dollars. If it was television, it would take billions of dollars. And your chances of success would be so low, you'd be crazy to bet on it. So we're going to only have fewer serious organizations in all likelihood. We'll never have a new one.
Couldn't you argue, though, that the democratization of the internet, or the media because of the internet, an organization like Slate has very well done what you just said is impossible?
Right. Well, there's a couple things. One is Slate, as successful as it's been, has at best hundreds of thousands of readers. That's what counts for success on the web. That's great. But we're a big country with several hundred million people. I think you need that kind of reach in order to foster a national dialogue and also to hold powerful interests accountable to public interest. When Slate has a great investigative story or a bit of analysis, how much impact does it have on the national dialogue? It has a big impact maybe within the world of Slate, but that's not the role the press needs to play if there's malfeasance going on or if there's an argument being made that should be heard. The other thing is, for every argument Slate makes, and many people they're reaching, there are people making countervailing arguments, maybe not as intellectually sound in some cases, that are reaching just as many people. So they're successful in their niche, but any country with a national political system needs a national organization that's going to reach tens of millions, maybe multiple tens of millions. Slate will never do that. They just, as successful as they've been, they'll never do that. Yes, ma'am.
I take some issue with your comment that you think that it's the audience that needs to demand more engaging reporting and that you would give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen studies from Media Matters and other organizations that suggest that a significant majority percentage of Americans are dissatisfied with reporting and do want legitimate, analysis of the issues.
Right.
So given especially the case of healthcare, isn't it the job of yourselves and the journalists to sell it to the sell it to the mainstream? Say, life or death for all Americans.
Right.
Then you'll get your 20 million eyeballs.
Right. I totally agree that it's our responsibility to give people not just what they want, but what we think they should have. And I totally agree it's our responsibility to be creative about how to present it in a way that will bring as big an audience as possible. And I've looked at some of the studies that I think you're referring to. I'll just say a version of what I said before. We would love to cover more serious things all the time. We would. It's what most of us got in the business to do. You can say people are dissatisfied, and they are. But the evidence based on what we put on the air or put in the magazine or put in a newspaper of how much traffic it draws versus what other things draw traffic for, it's just not close. Britney Spears on cable television and the internet, on serious websites like Time.com, would dwarf in traffic anything we'd ever do on healthcare. Now, does that mean we only do Britney Spears? No, although some days it seems that way. But it does mean...
There was breaking news yesterday.
That's right. It does mean that it's difficult for us to find data that would support a big investment in covering things a serious way. It's a cop-out if you're an organization that cares about public service to give up. But we have to survive economically. And if we did documentaries on healthcare, documentaries on immigration, when the networks still do that, which they rarely do, but when they sometimes do, they don't draw big numbers. They do try to promote them. When Peter Jennings was alive and making documentaries, he killed himself to promote. Every time he did a serious documentary, he would do anything to promote them, including demand from the network paid advertising to make sure people knew about them. And there's simply not a lot of evidence that the country wants the kind of serious news that I wish they did. And again, the simplest way, the simplest solution, and again, as someone inside and who watched the decisions being made, sometimes make some of them, the simplest solution, the one that I think is most likely to happen, is for people to actually be interested. There's plenty of serious stuff out there. The News Hour with Jim Lehrer, right? It's the most serious newscast on television. It's incredibly serious. I think it's relatively fair, although a lot of conservatives think it's liberally biased. Tiny little audience. It's available on free TV in, I think, 98% of the country. You can see that show. So you don't need cable. It's not on at a particularly inconvenient time. In many places it airs twice. tiny little audience. That newscast should have a huge audience. In a country this big, there should be more people interested in what is far and away a more serious newscast than any other that's being done on cable or broadcast, and yet it has a tiny little audience. I wish I could be more optimistic, but that's the reality. Yes, sir.
To what extent, when we were talking about this a lot, to what extent is the kind of the changing media with kind of the role of corporate America? I mean, is this part of it? Because like in the last 10 years, all these, basically it's GE, buying NBC,
Right.
Disney,
Right.
you have down, News Corp buying
Right.
newspapers. To what extent is this kind of, did
You
this
know,
start?
as you can tell, I'm not a particularly big defender of my industry, right? This is one that's not a problem. There have been corporate owners, they've just been different corporate owners. You're right that the current corporate owners of a lot of these places are big, giant corporations. But the people there tend to believe that at the Walt Disney Company, at Viacom, and at General Electric, and I won't say the same about News Corp, that the value of those news brands would be undermined if they were seen as interfering with the product in a corporate way, and that it makes them feel good to own public service news organizations. They like the notion that they've got a piece of their empire that's not making widgets or producing stuffed animals or rock music, but doing what looks like public service in many cases. There are a few instances at those three corporations, and at the New York Times Company and the Washington Post Company, where people make mistakes and the corporate interests say, don't do that story about the Walt Disney World having insufficient security, or don't do that story about this GE jet engine. But they're very small cases, and they're aberrational. The day-to-day decision-making at Dallas Morning News, at Time Magazine, at ABC News, owned by big, giant corporations, is not dictated in any way by corporate decision makers. Now, there is, as I said before, an establishment mentality that tends to believe, think more about corporations the way Dick Cheney thinks about corporations than the way Dennis Kucinich thinks about corporations. That's no question true. And in that sense, we alienate and disenfranchise people who think like Dennis Kucinich, and not a significant number of Americans. But that's a long-standing mindset of the last several generations. It used to be journalists were more populist than they are now. Not the result of the corporate ownership, changed corporate ownership.
So what about from like an economic standpoint? Like what I was really hinting at is like, is there more of a focus on economics and viewership and actually, revenue
sorry.
perspective? No, that's okay.
Did anyone enjoy my answer to the question he didn't ask? The most profitable show on television is the Today Show on NBC News, on NBC, and not just a news program, but any program. It makes like several $100 million. NBC News, ABC News both have made money, depending on how you do the accounting, for any number of years. Not a lot, but some. There's a greater premium on ratings than there used to be. There's no question. But again, that's a several decades long change, not a recent development. There's an effort to hold down costs. Again, it's true in network news, it's true at the Below Corporation, it's true everywhere. The news business, though, is not a great business. You're never going to, within General Electric or the Walt Disney Company, the news divisions are never going to be huge profit centers. They want them to not lose a lot of money. In part for the bottom line, in part because shareholders want every division to be doing decently. So it's more, the cost pressures though, and the concern about ratings is more about the pride and survival of the news divisions than it is from the pressure I just described. The news divisions just can't be money-losing entities. And again, that search for an economic model where we take our existing content and figure out a way to spread it out in different delivery systems with different kinds of sponsorships is driving a lot of the decision making. But it's not a recent development. When I joined ABC News in 1988, we were number 2 or 3 in the ratings, depending on the time of year and the day part. Shortly after I joined, through nothing but coincidence, we became number 1. And we stayed number 1 in the evening with Peter Jennings over at Dane Rand and Tom Brokaw until the O.J. Simpson criminal trial started. And during the O.J. Simpson criminal trial, NBC led with it almost every night. Almost every night, no matter what happened, Tom Brokaw went directly to a reporter outside the courtroom in Los Angeles. ABC, Peter Jennings didn't feel that that was a serious story. Almost never led with it. And during the trial, NBC passed ABC in the ratings, and until just a few months ago, shortly after I left ABC, also probably just a coincidence, ABC went back into first. But that was a pretty long period of time when ABC was in second. And in the business, particularly at ABC, it was very much, everyone was very much aware that the decision to not cover the O.J. Simpson criminal trial cost us first place and changed good habits that survive over a long period of time. That Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, O.J. Simpson mentality is a huge problem, and it's somewhat driven by ratings in the sense of economic survival, but it's also just part of the general tabloidization of our culture that the media both reflects and drives, and I'm not too happy with that. Yes, sir. Did you already have a question?
What's that?
Did you already have a question?
Barely.
I think you did. Stand by. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about perhaps like the governmental subsidization of like an alternative network, something more competitive than like a PBS or something like that can play like a half hour of Friends and then do an hour of immigration or something like
Right.
that? I mean, do you think that's a viable
I think
alternative?
this country's not that into that. It's not going to happen under George Bush.
Sure.
I think that just like we don't have public financing of elections, I think people, their general, they hate the government, they hate the press. Marrying them up, it's not a great marriage. I don't think the current technological age demands it. We sort of have that now, obviously, with PBS, and it's although they've had some infusions of private sector money, I don't think anybody thinks the PBS model is thriving. It's certainly not. It's certainly, although it has some popular programs, it's certainly not dominating the media landscape. So I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think it's a particularly good idea. I think the private sector is more vibrant, but again, it's because of cable and the web and where we're headed with a single box. There's just going to always be a lot of channels. And problem with something like you're describing is people like big stuff on free television. They want the Super Bowl, the Academy Awards, and there are a few big things, but then everything else is kind of a level playing field. And so you need huge budgets to produce something, and I just don't think you'd see a government funding of something that would compete with the Super Bowl, the Academy Awards, and richly produced primetime programs. Now, maybe she thinks she's wrong and I'm wrong, and that well-produced programs on immigration, cheaply produced programs on immigration would draw a big audience. But I think I don't see a lot of evidence of that.
I mean, if you take a look at PBS, this coming Sunday, Ken Burns'
Right.
series about World War II, which took longer to make than the actual war was fought in, and I think cost almost as much. It's going to have a gigantic audience. It's supposedly a
Right.
fabulous program,
Right.
but that's because the public wants to see it.
Right.
Okay, and also they'll come with a gigantic advertising budget. I think when people were trying to figure out how to do serious journalism or serious documentaries, whatever those are, they're also trying to figure out how can we reach a wider audience. Is it through multi-broadcasts, as opposed to the old model of it's on between 11 or
Right.
to 9 and 10 once? Is there a way to be able to make use of the internet streaming, where you can have multiple hits over a long period of time? And I think the news organizations are trying to figure out how to be able to use the internet that way. So we live in a universe where there's a lot of confusion, and people are trying to figure that out. But in terms of the large audiences, and remember, on television right now, 45 years ago, there were 3 networks. Okay, and everybody watched CBS, NBC, and actually very few people watched ABC back then because it wasn't a real network to a certain extent back in the early 60s.
And I wasn't there yet.
That's right, just by coincidence.
Right.
So there were naturally millions upon millions of people watching Walter Cronkite. And the lay of the land has just changed. Can I ask a campaign-related question? In terms of the way campaigns can use the media, and actually, Wayne, this will be good because you can tell me if Karl Rove really is the super genius and did this, to be able to win the election in 2004. Okay, what event in the 2004 election, had a supposed great impact on the election? Swift Vote Veterans for Truth. Okay, how did this actually work? If you ask people today, the Swift Vote Veterans for Truth ads, if I ask most of these people over here, you probably say these ads were broadcast all over the United States. They were very important. And actually, as I recall, they were broadcast in, 3 or 4 cities a couple of times? Okay, what happens is that I'm assuming the Bush campaign had something to do with this because by coincidence, the legal counsel for the Swift Vote guys was also the legal counsel for the Bush-Cheney campaign. And the major funders of the Swift boat ads were also gigantic and Texas-based funders of Republican campaigns. I can't prove this, but if you're into conspiracy theory, did Karl Rove think this out? The impact of those commercials was that they essentially created news. Okay, and that news created a situation in which, and we can, agree or disagree on this, the Kerry campaign did not exactly react. Okay, now, if you take a look at the news coverage of this, the Boston Globe had a fabulous series analyzing the Swift boat ads. And by the way, if you're looking for good journalism, there's a fabulous 7-part series the Boston Globe did on Mitt Romney, which is like reading a fabulous campaign biography. You want to know anything about Romney, especially if he becomes the Republican nominee, go into the web right now and read it, because I finished it last week. It's amazing reporting for a newspaper. Okay, so the Globe has this big article about the Swift boat ads, tears them apart, it's talking about the long histories of these guys or whatever. Did that have a big impact to the campaign, or did the ads themselves have a big impact? Well, the ads themselves had a big impact. Why did they? Okay, why did they work, if these are scurrilous attacks, and the Boston Globe's, journalism not work? Okay, what I would maintain is when you're doing campaign research, and this is, is Rove a genius or not, is the story reinforce what the public is prone to believe? Okay, so if you're prone to believe that there's something wrong with Kerry's character, okay, are you going to believe that there may be something, a chink in his armor back over there? Or are you going to be looking for, long, in-depth journalism to figure out if this story is actually true or not? So essentially, what does a campaign do? A campaign is trying to figure out a story which is going to be reinforced the public may already be inclined to believe. Does this make any sense at all, or am I misinterpreting what happened with the Swift votes?
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know that Karl Rove engineered it.
Well, that's what I was asking Wayne.
No, go ahead,
Has
Mark.
Karl talked to you about
Yes,
this?
no. He did.
Boy, there's a lot there. Well, we didn't give me room open up to is to mention my old book, which talks a lot about how the Swift boats happened and about how Kerry reacted and didn't react to it. I think that presidential politics is a little bit different than other campaigns in a lot of ways. In some ways, it's very different. One of the biggest differences is in a down ballot race, paid media is much more important. In part because local media doesn't cover the day-to-day movements in most races. Even a Senate race or a governor's race doesn't get anything like the free media coverage of a presidential. So in a presidential campaign, as much time as they spend fundraising to run ads, a lot of it is the coverage they get in major papers and on television, particularly television. What the Republican Party is better at than the Democratic Party to this day, although Hillary Clinton, one of the reasons for her success is she's been very good at this too, is understanding the media food chain. The Boston Globe 7-part series on Mitt Romney, which is an excellent series and the kind that newspapers routinely used to do, but it's a rarity these days. No one is reading the Boston Globe and saying, wow, here's part 1, here's part 2, here's part 3. Let's get that into the media food chain. That just doesn't happen to a 7-part newspaper series. What does happen with a negative ad is it goes from Matt Drudge to the Fox News Channel to the New York Post to the New York Times. Because Republicans have figured out that if you can create a phenomenon with relatively little bit of money, you can get it into the media food chain. And then the story becomes not the original relatively small number of television ads that were purchased in 3 or 4 cities. The story becomes how this negative ad is out there and how this negative ad is on the Drudge Report. And this negative ad is being talked about on cable TV. And then some reporter, sometimes from the Fox News Channel or the New York Post, will ask the candidate who's being attacked about it. And then John Kerry's been asked, or John Kerry will go on Imus. And Imus reads the Drudge Report. And he'll ask John Kerry. At that point, everybody has a free chance to ask the question, well, what effect is this ad having? Then, when the Kerry campaign, which is more undisciplined than the Bush campaign, is asked about it, you see anonymous quotes from Kerry aides saying, I think he should react more, but my colleagues don't. That creates a story. That creates more churning. That drives more of the narrative. No one, as far as I know, but maybe the two of us and Karen, has read the Romney series. No one, as far as I know, has ever asked anybody.
A lot of time on my hands.
Well, it's admirable you read it. It came out about 9 months ago. No one, as far as I know, I'm not kidding, it really did. No, yeah. It's a very positive series, which is interesting in and of itself, because the Globe tends to attack Massachusetts presidential candidates. But no one, as far as I know, has ever asked anybody about anything in that series. Except did the series have to think about the dog on the roof of the car? Was that in the series? That got a lot
The
of
dog was
pickup.
not on the roof of the car in the series. no.
Okay, so that's a
I
different.
think it was a
So,
sidebar, I see.
It might have been. There are a lot of sidebars. But my point is that the series does not get into the bloodstream. It's the tabloidization of our media culture. Republicans are very good, and Karl Rove in particular, and Karen Hughes and Dan Bartlett were very good at saying, how do we make this part of the conversation? And Republicans have an advantage because there is no liberal equivalent to the Drudge Report. There's no liberal equivalent to Rush Limbaugh. There's no liberal equivalent to the Fox News Channel, or the New York Post. Those entities put things into the conversation and get more quote-unquote mainstream, again a phrase I don't use, organizations to cover it as a phenomenon. And that, you'll see a repeat of that. Hillary Clinton has learned to use not just the liberal parts of the media, but Hillary Clinton has learned to use the Drudge Report. She's taken advantage a few times of placing things with Drudge to her advantage. And that's, again, what makes her one of the many reasons she's a very strong candidate, because she understands you're not going to get a lot of pickup, and you're not going to frame images of yourself or your opponents with a 7-part newspaper series with multiple sidebars. You can with a negative television ad. The television press in particular loves negative television ads. Television press spends all their time saying to the candidates, why are you so negative? And then when they go negative, covering it and giving it a lot of attention. And that dynamic is not a new one, but in the world of cable and the web, is a more dangerous one than it's ever been. Keep raising your hand. I'm never going to call it until everybody's done. That's all right. We'll get that. Yes, sir.
All right, you mentioned framing, and I wanted to have you comment on the importance, not just within advertising, but a couple of words, and being, when the candidate is the one that puts them out there.
Right.
Frame something so important.
Right.
It seemed like Kerry just didn't get it,
Right.
and Bush and his people really got it.
Right.
Kerry's a flip-flopper.
Right.
Said so many times that it's not even, who questions it. But when it comes to the media, knowing that they're framing it that way, and the other candidate's going to frame it a different way, but it becomes, I guess, used so much, this candidate said this.
Right.
And it gets repeated.
Right.
At what point should, or does the media have an opportunity to say, this candidate is wanting to frame it this way, this is what he's
Right.
getting at, and kind of separate it a little bit, because the more that,
Right.
and that's the advantage of being a candidate that can wisely use some words. I think Obama has done that in a couple of instances. Hillary's Bush light.
Right.
That was repeated a bunch
Right.
of times.
It's one of the hardest things to do, because remember, as I said before, we also have an obligation to let the candidates speak. So if when we give them their 7 seconds to speak, they say over and over, you can't trust John Kerry, he's a flip-flopper, or George Bush, I'm resolute and strong. If they're disciplined enough to do that every time, it's hard to challenge.
And again, that's part of rule of reciprocity
Right.
in the sense that, we are obligated to, okay, that's their deal. That's what they're saying.
The other thing is, as long as it's not wrong, it's hard to challenge it. You may say, well, Kerry's not really a flip-flopper. Well, the press thought he was. One of the things, again, that Hillary Clinton is doing now that is so smart, maybe this will answer your question, is she's saying every time Mitt Romney attacks Hillary Clinton, her advisors, not her, because you don't want to use the candidate until you have to, her advisors say, Mitt Romney attacked her health care plan. They say, well, as often as Mitt Romney flip-flops, let's wait till tomorrow. Maybe he'll endorse her plan. Every time he attacks, their response is cast as Mitt Romney's a flip-flopper. Just as every time John Kerry attacked George Bush, Karen Hughes would say, well, here's John Kerry attacking our health care plan. He was for it before he was against it. That repetition, both in terms of defining yourself in a positive way, defining your opponent in a negative way, is very effective if it plays into, and again, here I'm in what is rather than what ought to be mode. It's very effective if it's what reporters already believe. And so what Dan Bartlett would do very effectively for George Bush is call people like Wayne Slater, call people like me, chat us up, almost treat us like a focus group. What is the press predisposed to believe about our opponent? And also to try to influence that. Hey, Kerry's a real flip-flopper. Did you see that story in the Akron paper about how Kerry flip-flopped on yet another thing? And then use that press conditioning, that press sensibility, the press sense of where the narrative is, and exploit it as much as possible, both influence and exploit it. It's not the right thing to do. We do have an obligation to say, you look at the scrutiny that Al Gore's war record got in 2000 versus George Bush's. You look at the scrutiny that John Kerry's flip-flops. Look at George Bush campaigned on Patients' Bill of Rights. He campaigned on doing something about emissions, global warming, that cause global warming, flip-flop instantly upon getting into office on both those issues. Pretty big parts of what he ran on. Those flip-flops were not covered nearly as much as John Kerry's flip-flops. One could make an argument that those flip-flops were at least as important as Kerry's flip-flops. We fail all the time in that obligation. We often fail because of the skill and sophistication of people like Karen Hughes and Dan Bartlett. That's not right. I agree with you. We have a huge obligation not to do that. But it is amongst the most difficult things to do in the heat of a campaign when we do want to let the candidates have their say directly to the American people.
My question kind of has to deal with the guts of the media at the national and lean to at the local level. I remember in 2005 when I was in D.C., they passed CAFTA and the energy bill.
Yeah.
And it only got maybe one article, one mention. And
Did you say cafe or cafe?
CAFTA. Out of the House at least.
Yeah.
And it only, the Note covered it, but it wasn't covered significantly anywhere else. But all the major newspapers, including the Dallas Morning News, go to this national level where,
Right.
you know, they may have a great, interesting story, and take Britney Spears out of the equation, CAFTA or the energy bill, but they're not going to try to be competitive. They're all going to focus on Iraq
Right.
or whatever. And on the local side, you know, I think that the local media has an ability to do stuff that the national media can't. I mean, in Dallas, when we had this, all the judges got wiped out, and Dallas County judge got wiped out, and it was, you know, heck on earth. In 2006, there was no coverage, no real coverage till after the election.
We didn't know what was going to happen, but yeah.
Yeah, but and those are the sorts of articles that I think a lot of people look to. But also the Dallas Morning News is nationalized as far as
Yeah.
their coverage falls in line with Iraq War, no CAFTA, no energy.
I mean, my answer would be two themes we've talked about already. One is you know, we learn over time what stories people are interested in, and there tends to be less interest in more serious stories. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to give people more serious stories. The other thing is reporters tend to be less interested in those stories, and editors, and we shouldn't let that bias enter into it, but we do. There should be more coverage of those kinds of things. And I'll go back to immigration. I'd include trade in that. I'd include some healthcare issues in that, which is people in Washington and New York are out of touch with what's going on, don't understand what's an important story, and don't cover it as much as certainly what reflects what's going on in the country, and I think in some cases what people would be interested in.
You know, that said, as a candidate or as an office holder, you're always trying to figure out how do you get yourself that free media? How do you get yourself on the news? I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but in the last 2 weeks, Patrick Rose, the state representative, has been on the front page of the Statesman twice with a picture. You know, one piece on his deal with the Lance Armstrong cancer campaign, and then one deal with Lance Armstrong in an article about how it'll raise money for state rep races. And I wrote him the other day saying, you know, who's your press guy? I mean, how are you actually doing this? How are you cutting through? So it's not impossible, okay? But it takes, you know, some skill trying to figure out how do you associate yourself with stories or associate you with something that the news is also going to be interested in, or maybe it's a relationship with a reporter. I don't know, but whatever it is, you know, it is possible. It just is not that easy.
Did you work on Capitol Hill when you were in Washington?
I worked with the House.
The White House. Well, then you know that part of the problem is the press is very oriented towards one branch over the other two. From the press's point of view, these are not co-equal branches. And people on Capitol Hill do stuff all the time that they think will get lots of coverage in the national media, and it
It's the
doesn't.
same story in every paper in every single day. I mean, Iraq War is important, but it's the same story.
Yeah. You know, the news hole's not limitless, and people choose to cover where they think the biggest story is. And there's often not space, the way the world currently works, for the second, third, and fourth stories. In the back.
I have a question about, as a news organization, your relationship with the personal lives of the people that you're reporting on. I guess specifically I'm talking about the Mark Foley scandal, which ABC broke prior to the 2006 election. And basically, if you've lived in DC for any period of time or been on Capitol Hill, Mark Foley's sexual orientation was fairly well known. It wasn't a secret at all. And how is that, how do you balance that and breaking the story at a certain time or place on such a personal matter? That's not related necessarily to his voting record.
Right.
Because he voted pro-gay rights fairly often while in the House.
Yeah. Well, on the question of timing, in that case and in most cases I know of, I don't see liberal or conservative bias in the organizations I'm familiar with. You know, you always face a choice about timing, which is if you do the story, you might be helping inadvertently one side, but if you don't do the story, it's the mirror image of that. So I'm always for doing stories when they're ready, using our normal standards, and letting voters factor that in along with everything else, not hyping it so it's the only thing that gets covered. In terms of personal lives, it's the same choice. There's a lot of criticism, particularly on the web, on the left and the right, but particularly, well, that's about equal, depends on who the target is, of the old media, the so-called mainstream media, saying, if everybody in Washington knows that Mark Foley is gay, if everybody in Washington knows that Mark Foley is hitting on House pages, if everybody in Washington knows that he's the head of the internet anti-predatory task force, if everyone in Washington knows, isn't it elitist and undemocratic to have everybody in Washington know, but to not share that with a wider audience? I have some sympathy for that argument. There's also an argument that people's private lives, as long as it doesn't affect their performance, shouldn't matter. And believe me, there are plenty of stories that aren't covered because people don't think it meets that standard. In this case, because of the position he held, because of the age of the people involved, because there was conclusive evidence in the form of instant messages and emails, ABC made the judgment that that was a story worth doing in the context in which it was done. I think that George Bush did a very strong and surprisingly successful thing when he ran for president, which was he said, when I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible. I'm not going to talk about things in specific. He was very reluctant to get drawn into conversations about past drug use. He got drawn into one in a way that I'm not sure why he thought that forced him to get drawn in, but he did. But he never really fully answered the question. Barack Obama has acknowledged using cocaine. I have been surprised and in some ways impressed that no reporter that I know of has asked him the circumstances of that. How often, when did he stop, did he pay for it, did he buy it, did he sell it? Maybe those things will come up or maybe not. But I think George Bush put the brakes on somewhat the open season on being able to ask any candidate for president anything they could think of about their personal lives. We'll see what 2008 brings in terms of Senator Obama and others, but it's a shifting landscape, but it was unusual for President Bush to kind of reverse the sensibilities a little bit. And I think candidates in 2004 and to some extent 2008 so far have benefited from that, from getting the press to reconsider. Because President Bush did it to some extent, to a large extent, as a self-preservation task, not because he'd done things so horrible, but because he didn't want his campaign to be defined by his young and irresponsible days. But I believe, from having talked to him about those issues as he was a candidate, that he also thought it was the right thing for the system, that Washington was too much, the political media culture of Washington and of national politics was too oriented towards digging into the personal lives of people, and that he wanted to contribute to changing that. And like I said, I think he has.
Can I ask you a couple things about that? Because with the Foley story, I think anybody that read anything about Florida politics at that point, you know, I'd read stuff, you know, and there weren't news stories. It's not, you know, a news story is not Mark Foley is gay. But Foley had been thinking about running for the United States Senate in 2006, and all the analysis that I read said that Foley's thinking about this, but there are these rumors that he's gay, and he's not sure he's going to do it. Okay, so even if you didn't know who Mark Foley was, you know, it's a sort of deal where when you begin to read analysis where there are rumors that he's gay, well, then he's got some sort of a political problem.
Right.
You know, the problem, the deal with the story was when the stuff with the pages broke. Now, again, I'm assuming that and I'm not making any assumptions over here, but there is always the possibility that broke because the news was leaked. But once it was leaked, it's, you know, there are text messages, and essentially you open yourself up to that. The thing about the Bush thing, and I'm actually curious about this with Wayne, considering Wayne's role in the 2000 campaign, is that Bush said there were youthful indiscretions, I'm not going to go into this. Then his campaign was almost sunk by the DUI story that comes out, what was it, 4 days before?
About it was actually almost 10
Thursday
days
or
before.
Friday.
Yeah, it was like
Thursday
7
or
days
Friday.
before, yeah, something like that.
Fine.
So, I'm not quite sure what I'm asking over here, but obviously, even though he to a certain extent was able to knock that issue away, that issue came back and almost almost sunk the campaign.
Well, actually, that's a good, very practical, it's a question that suggests something very practical. In your campaign plans, as you think of stuff, as you know your candidate, one of the things you want and you'll have in your campaign plan are opposition research, budget, some reference to that. That means that you're researching the other guy's record, but also some role in researching your own candidate's record, which as a practical matter turns out always be much more difficult.
And important.
It was very important, and typically candidates don't want to talk about this stuff. Oh, there's the part whatever. So you'll want to know what is it in your own candidate's background that could come out later and damage your candidate, and then think in terms of how you're going to deal with that. In the real world, it's not likely that when you sit down with your candidate for legislature, for governor, and you ask, okay, let's go through what's the worst, you look at the record, you look at financial issues, you talk to the candidate, your own candidate for your own research. It's not likely your candidate will say, oh, incidentally, I was engaged in a gang murder of 12 people when I was 12. Probably not going to say this, so understand that if that happened and if that eventually comes out, you're probably not going to get it. But you go as far as you can go in this development. In the case of George Bush, who had been arrested when he was very young, like 30 years old, I think, whatever, he was a very young man, in a car.
A lot of people in this room don't think 30 is very young, by the way.
That's the point. That's what I'm saying. That's why that he talks about young and irresponsible. He was not young and irresponsible when he was cited for drunk driving.
With his teenage daughter, or sister in the car.
Yeah, and Danny, kid sister, and John Newcomb, the tennis pro, and his, no, someone else. So you're in the car, which is really something larger about who George Bush was at that moment in terms of drinking and running around and goofing around and so gets cited for arrested and was guilty of drunk driving and all that means and all that doesn't mean. The campaign knew about this. Karen Hughes and Dan Bartlett, whose job it was that was one of the couple of three areas we really focused. They knew all about this, exactly when it could happen and the circumstances. And that Bush alone, Karen's advice was, let's get it out there. Now, we know this in retrospect now. And her advice was good, strong political advice. I mean, and get it out yesterday, not tomorrow. Get it out where it'll be totally dealt with and forgotten and not important, not a moving news story, not a moving narrative by the time you get closer to the campaign. That was her advice. I'm not sure what Bartlett's advice was. I'm not sure where he was. He was really a researcher at that point in the process. Bush, who Mark so charitably and eloquently presented in the most positive light, which I think is true, that Bush looked at this as in two ways. One, what's the political game here? Well, the political game is we get it out, we talk about it, we let people deal with it, and then we move on, and it's forgotten, and therefore will not be a damaging element at the end of the campaign. Bush's thought was, you know what, I'm not going to contribute to this kind of politics. Screw it. We're not talking. I don't want my daughter to hear this. I don't want this to be the kind of campaign that talks about it. So the candidate, if only you could run campaigns without a candidate, it would be so much. The candidate got in the way and made a bad political, but possibly a very good moral judgment, or a very good ethical judgment in the larger context of what our campaigns are all about. But the political decision was a bad one. Because remember this, there are two little rules lots of rules, two. One of them earlier, Rove used to say, if you're explaining, you're losing. What Mark was saying earlier about political campaigns, if you're explaining your health care plan in great detail, what you need to do, that ain't ever going to be as effective as a quick little message that gets through the clutter. The other thing is, in the context of these elements, if you got something that's going to be potentially a problem for you, get it out there. Not everything, not always, but think in terms of how are we going to deal with this. They chose not to deal with it because everything, you must assume, everything will be out by election day. And the closer you get to election day, the pressure cooker is such that the other side's leaked. That was leaked by that guy up in New Hampshire somehow,
Maine.
you know, Maine, I mean in Maine.
Sorry,
And-
we mix up Texas and Oklahoma, right?
And so, Bush, so it's going to come out. And it did a week before the election. And it worked against Bush. I mean, they are convinced that it knocked off, he lost some voters. What voters did he lose? He lost the voters in the 2000 race who were part of the Christian right or social conservatives or saw him as especially in light of his, I'm going to restore honesty and integrity to the White House after this Bill Clinton guy.
There's a couple reasons why, again, from a practical point of view and thinking about your campaign plans, why you want to put stuff out, the conventional wisdom, which is correct, why you want to put stuff out early on. One is, then you do it on your own terms. Then you do it in a way that you can control. You might do it with a favored reporter. Rudy Giuliani's current wife said that she had been married, it had been reported that year that this was her second marriage. Well, it turned out this is her third marriage. And so she found a reporter that she was comfortable with and told that reporter. So that the coverage of it was framed on her terms, with an interview, with her explanation, rather than waiting for some opposition researcher to find the marriage license from her first marriage and put it out where she wouldn't control it. The other thing is, and I almost never use sports metaphors in talking about politics except when absolutely essential, and this is one of those cases. My high school basketball coach, when I would make a mistake at the end of the game and would scream at me, and I would say, well, what about all the mistakes everyone else on the team made? Because that was the way to step up to the plate. I'm mixing my sports metaphors. And he would say, mistakes at the end are worse. And they are, because when you make a mistake at the end, there's less time to make up for it. And as Wayne suggested, the pressure and the intensity at the end is greater. So controversies are magnified. So when George Bush let this come out 5 days in advance on someone else's terms, he created a much bigger problem than if he put it out on his terms much earlier on. It would be interesting to know, amongst the senior advisors to Barack Obama, how many of them know the circumstances under which he used cocaine? I don't know the answer to that. And I've not asked them about it because that's not the kind of journalism I'm interested in. But as a student of politics, and I wrote about in my book the drunk driving thing and the circumstances of it and how the campaign thought of it. As a student of politics, it's interesting to think, are they just waiting? One of the questions I always try to get ABC anchors to ask during debates, but none of them like it as much as I do, is to ask each candidate, is there anything in your background which, if it were to become public, would disqualify you in the minds of millions of voters to be president of the United States? Let them bring it out on our terms. But it's a question that many political consultants ask their clients before they or prospective clients before they agree to work for someone. What is there in your background which, if it came out, might hurt your chances of winning this race? And again, if you know it, you can think about controlling it. Sometimes campaigns hold stuff back and think, where's the right time to put this out? Maybe on the day of the Petraeus testimony would be a good time to put stuff out. On a Friday after deadline of news organizations is a good day to put stuff out. Rather than, again, being at the mercy of something coming out. I suspect George Bush thought he'd get elected before that ever came out. Right. And that was part of his calculation. It hadn't come out when he ran for governor. One of the things, again, it's peculiar to presidential politics, but you see it down the line. People who've run for public office think, I've run for office, I was elected to the city council, I was elected in a very tough House race, I was elected the governor of a big state. Nothing new is going to come out. If it was going to come out, it would have come out already. I ran against, Jim Maddox, and if there was something negative on me that was going to come out, Jim Maddox would have found it because he's a crazy man. That's a mistake candidates make, because every level you go up, more stuff comes out. There's stuff that came out when Bush ran for governor the first time, but there's plenty of stuff that didn't come out till he ran for president. Whitewater didn't come out when Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton thought of Arkansas as the most competitive political environment in the world, had to run every 2 years, had tough primaries, tough general election. Whitewater never came up. Tons of other stuff from his past never came up till he ran for president. And that is a mistake that candidates make. And campaign strategists, you're writing up a campaign plan, you've got to think, what do I have to do to force my candidate to tell me? What is there in the background maybe he won't tell me or she won't tell me that we've got to be prepared for? And what's the best way to put it out? In terms of timing, in terms of what organization we go to, how we frame it. Do you call a press conference? Do you give it to one favored reporter? Do you have your spouse bring it up? Whatever it is. But it's critical, and it will be critical in 2008 because most of these people haven't run before. One of the advantages Hillary Clinton has is she has been through it. She may be the first person ever to be a first-time presidential candidate who has received presidential campaign level scrutiny. previously in her life, which means she knows how to deal with it, and most everything has come out. There'll be new stuff, but a lot of stuff has come out.
We have to wrap it up over here. I'm just thinking the one way not to do it in terms of classical examples was Gary Hart in 1987, who when the press was asking about extramarital affairs, invited the press to follow him, and they did. He didn't become president. We have to let Mark have at least half an hour off, but if you want to ask more questions, he'll be appearing at 12 o'clock at the Brown Bag Lunch over at the LBJ School, so you can grab a lunch and ask more questions. And I hope to see you guys on Friday, or at least some of you. Thank you.
Great.